Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
A new report is shedding light on how Department of Government Efficiency staffers gained access to sensitive Treasury Department payment systems last year. The Government Accountability Office found Treasury gave DOGE staffers access to data without following IT security rules. Privacy watchdog groups say GAO's report may be the tip of the iceberg on DOGE's access to sensitive government data. Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now with more details. Justin, thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, Terry.
All right, this is a new report from GAO. What does it reveal about DOGE's access to Treasury Department payment systems?
Well, GAO's report covers a somewhat short time period here, January and February 2025, the very start of the Trump administration when, as many folks will recall, DOGE was really doing this blitz across the federal government, starting in this case at Treasury, where they were seeking access to payment systems. And so GAO's report found that Treasury gave a DOGE staffer, an unnamed DOGE staffer, access to Bureau of Fiscal Service payment systems in at least three cases, three of those payment systems during that time period. The access allowed the staffer to view, copy, or print the data. But in one case, the staffer was inadvertently granted temporary access to create, modify, or delete data, which was not what they were necessarily seeking, but it did happen. GAO did not find any evidence of changes to the system data before the Bureau revoked that access. But what GAO's report found was that Treasury didn't follow its IT security rules for granting access to these really sensitive payment systems. For instance, they didn't ensure that a data loss prevention tool that is meant to kind of prevent Treasury payment data from going where it shouldn't, it didn't identify or prevent the sharing of USAID payment information by one of those DOGE staffers outside of Treasury's systems. And so that was one big issue here. And that was unencrypted payment information, so a big potential security hole. And then GAO found that Treasury didn't hold the DOGE employees accountable for not following IT security rules. They didn't, for instance, get written agreements to follow IT security rules before issuing them laptops and access. And so really this is about kind of following the IT security rules in the case of DOGE here, and how Treasury kind of jumped over some of those rules as DOGE was really seeking this sensitive data that was in the news last year.
What would DOGE have wanted to do with this data?
In this case, they were seeking access to USAID payments data in the early days of the Trump administration to essentially shut off payments to USAID, which they eventually did, of course, in dismantling that agency. And so this was part of really a quest to kind of target a specific agency, but of course that payments data that the Bureau of Fiscal Service handles goes across the entire federal government. The Bureau of Fiscal Service handles payments for the vast majority of federal entities. And so DOGE has also had interest in, fraud, waste, and abuse and nominally and things like that. And so, again, this is a somewhat limited report, and there may be more to come in terms of what else DOGE was kind of seeking to do or did do with access to these Treasury systems.
How is Treasury responding to GAO's findings?
Well, Treasury ultimately agreed with the GAO report's recommendations. GAO had a range of recommendations to define minimum screening requirements for people seeking access to payments data. It's something else that GAO found Treasury didn't really have in place prior to these incidents. Strengthening training before granting access to sensitive systems. We saw in this case, and I think in other cases as well with DOGE, that agencies were found to have not really done the standard training before granting access to sensitive IT systems. And then in the case of tooling, GAO recommended the Bureau of Fiscal Service either update that tool that would have prevented unencrypted payment information from being sent outside of their kind of network boundary, or just update their process for reviewing any sort of messages that would send unencrypted payment information outside of the agency. So Treasury agreed with the recommendations, and we'll see what the follow-through is from here.
Justin, you mentioned that this might just be the tip of the iceberg as GAO conducts these kinds of investigations. Are you able to generalize about any big takeaways about how DOGE and data privacy were interacting from this report?
Well, I went to some people who have been following this issue of DOGE and data access very closely. And fair to say they are definite opponents of the DOGE effort, but they've been following this from really the very beginning. You know, Quinn and X. Reese from the Center for Democracy and Technology really said that this is kind of just an unnerving report because it's written in GAO's typical kind of very, very bland style. No offense, GAO, but it's showing some pretty big ignoring of basic safeguards for this really sensitive data, and that could leave a range of people exposed to potential data errors or incorrect payment determinations, according to Quinn and X. Reese. John Davison from the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC, pointed out the same. He said Treasury flouted basic security safeguards here. And, you know, he pointed out that another section of the report where Treasury concluded that a DOGE staffer with this kind of access could cause, quote, inestimable damage to security interests, yet they didn't get a signed access agreement from the employee or comply with some of those other safeguards that we spoke about. And so the takeaway for them was really that, you know, this showed how Treasury in this case, but potentially there could be others, just ignored safeguards that we kind of all take for granted and think happen automatically.
Well, speaking of the potential for others, what comes next with these ongoing reports and investigations?
Yeah, this is interesting. So GAO said that this is just the preliminary report on DOGE's access to Treasury Department data, and there should be more to come there from GAO. GAO also released a report on DOGE's access at the National Labor Relations Board. It ultimately found that the DOGE team there did not use really any access that they were granted to the IT systems, but their report did not overlap with an ongoing investigation by the NLRB Inspector General into whistleblower allegations that a DOGE representative compromised sensitive National Labor Relations Board data last March. And so that investigation is ongoing. There are several ongoing court cases involving DOGE's access to data at the Social Security Administration, at the Office of Personnel Management, among others. And again, those are ongoing and more could come out there. So I think we're kind of seeing the second shoe drop in terms of all of this, you know, consternation around DOGE's access to data, some of the news stories and whistleblower reports that came out last year. Now you're seeing GAO reports come out a little bit more deliberative, a little bit more detail on some of these issues, IG investigations ongoing, court cases continuing to kind of slowly bring more things to light. And so there's still a lot more to come potentially on all of this this DOGE business that we were all talking about so much last year and has kind of gone away a little bit in the national interest or the national conversation right now.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for bringing us this story. It sounds like we will have to continue to pay attention.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry.
You can find his full story at federalnewsnetwork.com.